Again, friends, this is our course on Black history through the lens of the Black Church. Welcome to Lesson 4, Cultural Renaissance, the Black Church and the Harlem Renaissance. We've seen how the Black Church became the foundation of African American community life. Now we enter the 1920s and 1930s, a period of extraordinary cultural creativity known as the Harlem Renaissance. This was the jazz age, a time when black writers, artists, and musicians proclaimed a new racial pride and produced art that changed American culture forever. And at the heart of this creative explosion was a complicated relationship with the Black Church, sometimes inspiring, sometimes conflicting, but always deeply connected. The Harlem Renaissance happened in cities, Harlem, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, where the Great Migration had brought millions of African Americans seeking new lives. And in these cities, black churches became massive institutions unlike anything the South had seen. Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, led by Adam Clayton Powell Sr., had over 10,000 members. They weren't just churches, they were community centers with gymnasiums, employment offices, health clinics, and social programs. They had budgets in the hundreds of thousands and staffs of dozens. Meanwhile, storefront churches multiplied on every block. Pentecostal, holiness, spiritual, bringing southern worship styles to northern streets. Walk through Harlem on Sunday morning and you'd hear a symphony. Traditional hymns from one church, gospel shouting from another, and yes, jazz drifting from the nightclubs that had been jumping until dawn. This was the contradiction of the era, sacred and secular. Church on Sunday morning and the Cotton Club on Saturday night, living side by side, often in the same person. Let's look at sacred music's influence. The spirituals that had sustained enslaved people now inspired Renaissance artists. Concert singers like Marian Anderson and Roland Hayes brought spirituals to the world's great stages, performing them as art music. When Anderson sang Deep River at Carnegie Hall, she was saying, "This is our culture, and it is as sophisticated as any European composition." And something new was being born in the churches. Gospel music. Thomas Dorsey, who had played blues piano in clubs, converted and began writing sacred songs with blues feelings. Precious Lord, Take My Hand, and other gospel songs combined the emotional intensity of the blues with Christian faith. Many churches rejected it at first, too worldly, too much like the devil's music, but it caught fire. Gospel said, "Our suffering is real, our emotions are valid, and we'll bring all of that to God." It was blues sanctified, jazz made holy, and it created a bridge between Saturday night and Sunday morning. So, the church in literature and art is worthy of our attention. Renaissance writers couldn't escape the church. It was too deeply woven into black life. James Weldon Johnson wrote God's Trombones, powerful sermon poems that captured the cadence and poetry of black preaching. He transformed folk sermons into high art, showing the world the brilliance of black pulpit oratory. Langston Hughes had a more complicated relationship. He wrote beautifully about church culture, but also criticized religious hypocrisy. His poem, Goodbye Christ, scandalized many church folk. Yet, even Hughes couldn't fully separate himself from the church's influence, its rhythms, its imagery, its community. Zora Neale Hurston Trained as an anthropologist, documented black religious practices with scholarly precision and artistic beauty. She captured the ecstatic worship, the folk beliefs, the sermons, preserving a culture that educated elites sometimes dismissed. Artists like Aaron Douglas incorporated religious imagery, silhouettes of praying figures, biblical themes into paintings that celebrated black identity and history. So we see here a sacred and secular tension. But here's when it got complicated. The Renaissance celebrated jazz, blues, dance halls, and nightlife. Everything many churches condemned as sinful. Preachers thundered against the devil's music. Jazz was worldly, sensual, dangerous. Good church folk didn't go to cabarets or listen to blues about love gone wrong. Yet, the same people who shouted in church on Sunday were tapping their feet to Duke Ellington on Monday. The same communities that produced gospel quartets also produced blues singers. The boundaries were more porous than church leaders wanted to admit. This created a dual identity for many African Americans: publicly respectable, church-going, moral, but privately drawn to the freedom and creativity of secular culture. It was exhausting and exhilarating, this balancing act between the sacred and the profane. The church tried to be a moral compass during rapid cultural change, warning against the dangers of city life, alcohol, gambling, loose morals. But young people, newly urbanized, wanted to express themselves in new ways. The church represented tradition and stability. The Renaissance represented innovation and liberation. That brought about a new religious movement or movements. The urban North also gave birth to new religious movements that challenged traditional Christianity. Father Divine's Peace Mission movement promised heaven on earth through communal living and racial harmony. Daddy Grace's United House of Prayer offered spectacular services with brass bands and emotional worship. The Moorish Science Temple and early forms of Black Islam rejected Christianity altogether as the religion of oppressors. These movements attracted thousands, especially those who felt traditional churches weren't addressing economic injustice or racial oppression strongly enough. They showed that religious authority in black communities could be contested, reimagined, transformed. The Harlem Renaissance showed the black church at a crossroad. How do you honor tradition while embracing change? How do you maintain moral authority while respecting creative freedom? These tensions were never fully resolved. They didn't need to be. The church and Renaissance culture pushed each other, challenged each other, and together created something extraordinary. Next, we'll look and see how this church, tested by modernity, strengthened by struggle, would become the spiritual and organizational engine of the greatest social movement in American history, the Civil Rights Movement. I look forward to seeing you there.